Two balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swinging a drive, deep left field. It's his way back. Welcome on, Chris Taylor.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Justin Lorber. Justin, last time we talked, we were in the middle of the lockout. There was seemingly no hope or optimism for a baseball season. Now, as we sit here, we're a few days away from opening day. Are you excited for? Are you ready? Have you mentally prepared yourself for the season?
It was a quick adjustment, but yeah, we're in much better times than the last time we talked.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we're recording this on a Monday. We're going to post it on a Tuesday. Opening day a few days away, but the reason we've got Justin on is because his prospect rankings have just been posted. As far as I'm concerned, Justin's the best when it comes to Dodger-specific rankings, prospect insight, that type of thing. So I'm excited to dive in with that. And I know we got tons of people watching or listening and that are curious, are these guys going to be able to make an impact? Are their names Michael Busch, Ryan Pepio, guys who could actually make an impact in 2022? And so let's dive into your list. You've got a rankings primer on the first page, futuredodgers.com, by the way, if you're looking for this. But you've got a quote in there I want to set the stage with. You say, the system is in the best shape it's been in several years. It's the deepest it has been in some time. Can you sort of expand upon that and sort of what does that mean to the average fan?
So I think in terms of the overall system, it's probably in the best place it's been since early 2019 when you had the trio of Lux, May, and Ruiz all kind of consensus top 25, top 35 prospects in the game or very close to it. You also had Will Smith, who, looked like he was primed to make major league impact that year, and he did. Of course, he's done a lot since then. So I think the system is probably at its best point since then. I know, if you look at various farm system rankings on different publications, I know Keith Law at The Athletic has them at number 1. Other sites have them, around number 10. I think they're solidly a top 10 system. But the biggest selling point for me is the depth, especially on the pitching side. There are a ton of really exciting, fun arms, really at every level, especially at the lower levels. I think a lot of guys who, could blow up if they do well.
Yeah. It feels like when I look at some of those rankings, and you reference, hey, they had a year when there were 3 guys in the top 25. Most lists I kind of peruse. I don't see the Dodgers, at least not right now, and I think it's because their best guys are a year or two away from the major leagues. But they don't really have many guys that are in the top 20-ish. But depending on where you look, I think some places have like 6 top 100 guys, or if they don't, there's maybe 6 guys in the top 115, 120. And yet it feels like when we're going to talk about some of these guys like Cartaya and Miller, Pages, these feel like we could be looking a year from now where the Dodgers not only have 6 top 100 prospects, but they've also got 3 of those guys in the top 10, 15, 20. Do you think that's a fair assessment? That next year, from a rankings perspective, it might be even better?
It could be, and it depends on who they might trade, who they draft, who graduates from prospect eligibility. There are, a few guys who could, I think more so than last year, who could come up and make a contribution and, lose their prospect eligibility. But yeah, Cartaya and Pages are 2 guys who, if they keep doing what they did last year at higher levels against better competition, I think they will be, pretty close to elite prospects consensus, if not elite.
Okay, one last question before we get into specifics. I'm curious, and I know the easy answer is yes to all of the things I'm about to say, but I'm curious from how did the Dodgers get to a place where, as you say, Keith Law at The Athletic has them as the #1 farm system. If you had to choose to identify one thing that the Dodgers are better at than anybody else in the league, I was reading Pedro Mora's book, and he was saying the Dodgers are not supposed to be able to assemble a farm system the way that they have. Like, they are penalized in the draft for spending the money that they do and for going out and signing the guys that they do and performing as well as they do. And yet the Dodgers are drafting at the back of the first round. They have the smallest international pool, and they're doing better. So from your perspective, if you had to choose between international scouting and signing, drafting, and then actual just player development once you get guys in, is there one of those 3 areas that you would say is more, the Dodgers have a massive competitive advantage in that one particularly?
I mean, I think their competitive advantage is that they do all 3 really, really well.
Okay.
There are some teams who might be great drafters, but not great developers, or vice versa. They do all 3 really well. And I think on the draft side, the last 2 years have been very pitching heavy, but none of those guys have made their major league debuts yet. We're going to need a few years to figure out what those classes actually will look like. but so far, the early returns on the last two draft classes, which have been very, very pitching heavy, have been good. In addition, for a while, the Dodgers' international group of prospects had not been making a huge impact. They had the big spending year in 2015 when they got Yadier Alvarez and Yusniel Diaz and a whole bunch of other guys spent a lot of money, and they really have not gotten a major league impact from that class aside from trades.
Yeah.
Of course, they traded Oneil Cruz to the Pittsburgh Pirates for Tony Watson, which doesn't look like a great deal. They traded Yadier Alvarez to the Astros for Josh Fields. Looks even worse. So those are the only real major league impacts from that class. Whereas the last couple years, it really, besides Cartaya and Wilman Diaz, a lot of the guys who I have highly ranked were not, these super notable touted prospects when they signed internationally. A lot of mid-level guys who signed, for example, Miguel Vargas and Andy Pages both signed for $300,000 when the Dodgers couldn't sign anyone for more than $300,000.
Yeah.
So these mid-level international signings, Jose Ramos is another guy, Jorge Vivas, Eddie's Leonard, all these guys, were signed kind of under the radar and were developed. And on the offensive side, the, top 30 or so, the majority of it is international guys. And I think it's 8 of my top 9 position players are international signees.
Wow. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a great point that that uniquely they're great. I mean, when on the draft side, I always go back to the 2016 class because it's hard to evaluate drafts for a few years because, as you said, most of these guys aren't going to make their major league debuts for at least 3 years afterwards. But 2016, the Dodgers picking 20th. They get Gavin Lux in the first round. Supplemental round, they get Will Smith, 32nd overall. You go into the second round, Mitch White in the second round, Dustin May in the third round, DJ Peters in the fourth round, Tony Gonsolin in the ninth round. And then you just keep going down the list. I believe it's McKinstry that they popped in the 33rd round. So, I mean, you're talking about May, Smith, Lux, McKinstry, and Gonsolin in one draft in which you're not picking in the top 19 is pretty remarkable. But then to be able to take a Zach McKinstry, to scout him, to see something there, Tony Gonsolin, and then to develop them on top of the international side where you can draft and develop is remarkable. So it's impressive stuff from the Dodgers, and I just laugh because teams want to talk about, or opposing fans want to talk about how the Dodgers just outspend everyone, which is true, but it's also like, yeah, not only do we outspend people, but we also have the best scouting department, the best player development department, the best international system set up. And so it's a good time to be a Dodger fan. When Keith Law came out with his #1 ranking, I mean, I'm curious, like, what's your reaction to that? The Dodgers are the best team at the major league level and the #1 farm system. It seems almost unfair.
In all honesty, I probably wouldn't put them at #1. I think they're certainly, a top 10 farm system. And I think the other thing is with their guys, you try to view them objectively, but you also know that the Dodgers are good at what they do. And those guys might have a better chance of reaching their full potential or, raising their ceiling than guys in other organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's get into specific names. We'll start at the top. The name that I can't help thinking about or talking about without a big smile on my face, and that's Bobby Miller. He was your #1 guy midway through last season. He's your #1 guy this year. He was #4 preseason last year. The statement out of spring training that he is, quote, sitting at 101 in his starts, I can't imagine that hurt him in your ranking setup.
No, it definitely helped. I think that probably reaffirmed him at #1. Really, and you wouldn't expect it given the velocity he hasn't gotten a ton of whiffs on his fastball. And for me, that's the main thing separating him from, looking like one of the best pitching prospects in the minor leagues. And maybe the velocity helps that once we have a larger sample size. But I think, he really does look like a major league starter and someone who can contribute as soon as this year, whether it's in a starter role, a bulk multi-relief inning role, or just a, short inning relief role.
Comparing him to some of the guys that we've seen come through the system, Walker Buehler, Dustin May, I mean, is he in that tier of prospect in your mind? I mean, obviously, I'm not trying to project what Buehler has gone on and done at the major league level, but sort of at equal points. And Buehler's probably better comparison because both those guys came from college. I mean, is he on the track that Buehler's on? Is he a little behind Buehler's? Where would you sort of slot him to again, I'm just trying to think of the fan who doesn't follow prospects all that much and is saying, is this the next Walker Buehler or is this the next Tony Gonsolin?
I wouldn't quite call him the next Walker Buehler. I think that's really, really high praise to put on any prospect because Buehler is one of the best 5 pitchers in baseball, I think. So I wouldn't call him that. I think he is someone who, can definitely come up and be a mid-rotation starter. I think there's a variance of opinion on people who like Tony Gonsolin. I certainly do. I think he's a solid mid-rotation starter.
Yeah.
But he's a different kind of guy. Bobby Miller's. He is going to, overwhelm people with stuff and velocity. And like I said, I think if he can get more whiffs on his fastball, we're looking at someone who could be an upper echelon starter.
I mean, do you think right now, if at opening day, if the Dodgers were putting their best 5 starting pitchers on the roster, would he be in that group?
I don't know, to be honest. Best 5 major league starters, I would lean no.
Okay.
And you also have to remember that he didn't throw a whole lot of innings last year.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact number, but coming off the 2020 season, he dealt with a little bit of injury issues. So he did not, pitch a full season. So to expect him to come up and, start every 5 days and pitch 200 innings, it's not realistic, and they're not going to do that to him.
Yeah.
But I think someone who could definitely make an impact in the second half of the year.
One more question on Miller. What is it? We know the velocity is there. I've heard stuff, he might have the best stuff of any pitcher in the entire minor leagues, I think was a quote that I read from The Athletic somewhere. Talk a little bit about his mix. What does he present to an opposing hitter who has to stand in the box? Obviously, it's high velocity throughout an appearance, it sounds like. What other sort of challenges does he present to opposing hitters?
He's got a good slider. He has a really good changeup that he has improved a lot since being drafted. He has a curveball that he can land for strikes, although right now it's his 4th pitch. And he throws a lot of strikes. I think with a lot of these stuff first guys, you expect them to kind of be wild, but he is a strike thrower. He's really athletic. I was told he's one of the best athletes in the system. That's position player or pitcher. He was a 2-way player in high school. He played a little outfield, but mostly pitching in college, if not entirely pitching, not 100% sure on that. And then, of course, all pitching since then. So, he can throw. It's a starter's mix. It's certainly a starter's mix. You don't have an issue where, well, he's only got 2 pitches, so he might have to move him to relief. That certainly is not the issue with him.
Got it. And I'm blanking. Is he going to be a AA or a AAA guy to start this season?
My guess would be AA, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him at AAA after a little while.
Okay. And of course, he's getting a start against the Angels in the Freeway Series, which, get your popcorn ready for that. That'll be fun. Let's go down the next few guys in the list. Cartaya, Pages, Vargas, Bush, Pepio, round out 2 through 6. My question to you, and you can take this any direction you want, is Pepio the last guy before we drop down a level of tier? Is there a tier break after Cartaya? Kind of how do you have these 6 guys in relation to the rest of this list?
I think there might be a slight tier break with Pepio, but it's not as big as I expected it to be. After talking to some people and doing a little more research, I think the distance between the top 6 and Leonard and Nastrini and Ramos, who are my next 3, isn't that huge.
Okay. Which of those guys? So then let's stick with the top 5 then. Cartaya, Pages, Vargas, Bush, and Pepio. I guess top 6 because I want to get to Nostrini. I know you've got some things you want to talk about with Nostrini. But those 6. Cartaya, we've heard about. Pages, Vargas. If you follow prospects, Bush, Pepio. These are all names that we're familiar with. Is there a guy on that list of those 6 that maybe you like a lot?
I love Andy Pages.
Okay.
He is probably my favorite prospect in the system. His feel to drive the ball, to lift, is pretty unparalleled, I think, in the system. I know Eric Longenhagen over at Fangraphs has called him the Launch Angel Unicorn for his ability to generate Launch Angel at an extent that's, would be at the top of the list for major leaguers, not just minor leaguers. He is someone who can absolutely play right field. He's got a really strong arm, but you can probably put him in center and he can be passable for the first few years of his career. And unlike a lot of power prospects, unlike a lot of young power first prospects, he doesn't have significant swing and miss issues. I think the plate discipline and the swing decisions aren't a huge issue with him. He takes his walks. So he should start in AA this year, and if he does well, I wouldn't be surprised to see him move up to AAA towards the second half of the year.
I was going to say, is he a 2023 sort of potentially at the major league level guy?
Yeah, I would be surprised to see him this year. He does need to be added to the 40-man roster to be protected from the Rule 5 draft this winter. So unlike Miguel Vargas, who also isn't on the 40-man roster, needs to be protected, I don't see him making a major league impact this year unless, there's a catastrophic series of injuries.
Yeah. Well, hey, depending on what you think about Cody Bellinger, Dodgers might need a center fielder a year from now. Hey-o. All right, we'll leave that one alone. I won't ask you for your Bellinger take. Quickly on Vargas and Pepiot, a couple guys we've seen this spring. I mean, small sample size, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anything you saw from them that was either encouraging or alarming?
Well, Vargas absolutely tanked the ball against Shane Bieber.
Yes.
At a 3-2 count, he saw like 8 or 9 pitches and then just demolished a ball with a full count. So I think, it's spring training, but it's always encouraging to see, one of your top prospects nuke a ball off, one of the best 10 or so pitchers in baseball.
Yeah. Vargas or Bush, one of those guys that you maybe think could make an impact as a designated hitter type at the major league level. If you had to pick one, do you think it's Bush that gets the first crack ahead of Vargas?
That's actually a good question. I think either could. Where that might come into play is, where a position opens up.
Yeah.
Vargas has played third base. He's played first. He's played a little bit of second, but I'm not sure if you'd see him there in the major leagues. Bush, primarily a second baseman, but he's played a lot of first base in his past. He's played a little bit of corner outfield in college too. So if there's a need in left field, I think they could probably throw him out there and it wouldn't be a huge issue. So if I'm picking one, I'll go with Vargas, but I could see either.
Okay. All right, let's move down the list. Eddie's Leonard, Nick Nastrini, Jose Ramos, 7, 8, 9. This is where we get into a category that if I am not anywhere near the level of you following Dodger prospects. I love reading about prospects, so these are 3 names I'm familiar with, but names that I think the average fan that's tracking the major league level, they probably heard about Vargas, Pages, Pepiot, that kind of thing. Talk to me a little bit about Leonard, Nastrini, and Ramos.
So Leonard kind of blew up last year. One of, if not the biggest breakouts in the system. Hit well at both levels of A-ball, facing older competition. He played shortstop, he played second base, he played third base, he played center field. He didn't look like a plus defender at any of those positions, but he can play any of those positions. And, especially shortstop, second base, center field, those are middle of the field positions that are super valuable where, the offensive production you get is more valuable than it would be at corner positions. So the fact that he can play those passively, the exit velocities were impressive. He does not chase a whole lot as well, showed good back control. I think he's someone, to be excited about. And the Dodgers showed they value him because they put him on the 40-man roster, even though he hasn't played above high A. So, you would think a team taking a hitter who hasn't played at AA, who hasn't played at AAA, and putting him in the major leagues for an entire season and having to, have him ride the bench and, kind of not ruin, but lessen a year of development. You might not expect them to do that, but they thought highly enough of him and they worried enough that another team might take him to put him on the roster. And to me, that indicates that, they know what they have here, which is a, potentially valuable utility player.
Are we talking about like a Chris Taylor? I mean, is that like the best case scenario for a guy like Leonard as far as profile, production, versatility?
Yeah, I think that's the ceiling.
Okay.
And I'm not saying like 2021 first half all-star Chris Taylor. But yeah, someone who can play all over. He only played center field, I think, but I don't see a reason why they couldn't throw him in left or right if he has the outfield experience. And someone who can hit well and play those positions passively, and that's valuable to any team.
Yeah, so Leonard, preseason a year ago, you had him 79th in the system, so that's a trend. But let's get to Nastrini. You and I offline have talked a couple times, and I know Nastrini is a guy that you are fascinated by. He was drafted by the Dodgers last year. He formerly projected as a first-round guy, kind of fell because he couldn't find the strike zone to save his life. And then last year he pitches in the Dodgers system, player development 101, and the guy looks like an absolute stud. So Nastrini, you have, quote, trending way up. What do you like about Nastrini?
Yeah, I was told that, this wouldn't be a universal opinion, but you might find some people who think that he's the Dodgers' best pitching prospect just based on the stuff alone. Of all the arms, and there are a lot of fun arms in this system, I think he probably has the highest upside if he can continue to throw strikes. This is frontline starter stuff. Wow. I think people may or may not know the backstory with him falling to the end of the 4th round. had a lot of not just command issues, but control issues at UCLA last year, was removed from the rotation, placed in the bullpen. He played a little bit of summer ball in Santa Barbara before the draft. Looked like he got a little bit back on track, and the Dodgers took him, signed him to a slightly overslot bonus in the 4th round. And what I was told shortly after the draft is he was, sitting in the upper 90s with good traits on his four-seam fastball for the Dodgers. And, that showed. I think his strikeouts per 9 last year in very limited innings in high A was over 18. So more than 2 strikeouts per inning. And you add in 2 good breaking balls, a curveball, a slider, a changeup with good metrics as well. The starter's body, the really large question is how many strikes is he going to throw? Because this is the starter's mix. It is a, top of the rotation mix if he can throw enough strikes. And so there's a short track record here of that. But, in my rankings, I think that, I think I'm going to prioritize probably a little bit higher the ceiling of guys like that. And, Nastrini was someone who I moved up a couple times as I was, thinking things through.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the obvious comparison for Nostrini is the guy that you've got number 13, who is Maddox Bruns. He was a high school pitcher the Dodgers took in the 1st round. He's just under 20 years old. He's the 13th ranked prospect. So again, the 1st round pick is 13th. The 4th round prospect is number 8. Correct me if I'm wrong. That has way more to do with Nastrini figuring a bunch of stuff out than anything you've seen from Bruns that worries you.
Yeah, Bruns is younger. We got a positive report on him a couple weeks ago from the Athletics' Keith Law, him looking like he was dominating a low A game in spring training. I think he called it, elite stuff from a lefty from even a major league perspective. And Bruns does have elite stuff. He's another guy who, has a mid-90s fastball with 2 breaking balls and a changeup. So starter stuff. If he can throw enough strikes, I think the question marks are a little bigger there with Bruns just because of, what the reports were out of the draft and even last season in his, couple appearances in the Arizona Complex League. But another guy who, if he throws enough strikes, he is going to make a big name for himself very quickly.
Love it. Love it. All right, so going through the rest of the top 15, Jose Ramos 9th, Landon Knack 10th, Wilman Diaz 11th, Yorvit Vivas 12th, Bruns 13th, Gavin Stone 14th, Andre Jackson 15th. Then you get into Michael Grove at 17, Clayton Beater at 18, Peter Hubeck, another draft pick, at number 19, Outman at number 20. I mean, we're going to get to some of these guys, I think, in a moment, but any of those other names that you feel like, hey, I want to say something about this person?
Yeah, I'll talk briefly about Jose Ramos, who profiles similarly to Andy Pages in that he's a right fielder with a strong arm, but you can play him in center field passively. Big power, huge exit velocities. But I think the main difference, and I talk about this in my notes, is the difference in their swings. Whereas Andy Pages, he's the quote unquote launch angle unicorn, really steep vertical bat angle, steeper swing that he uses to lift. Jose Ramos has a flatter swing that he uses. He loves to attack fastballs at the top of the zone, which is kind of where the trend is going. So depending on how you feel, I'm not sure how many listeners have really concrete feelings on steep versus flat swings, but it's a different kind of swing. But he hits the ball really, really hard. I know he made a great catch last night when he came to the game in the 8th inning. So Dodger fans got to see a little bit of him, and I would expect him to be, I would guess, high A to start, but he might go back to low A, even though he did well there in a couple months last year.
Love it. Love it. All right, let me hit you with some rapid fire questions then to before we get you out of here. So the first one is, as you were making these rankings, was there a guy who was the biggest surprise to you one way or the other? Like a guy that going into the process that maybe you didn't see yourself moving up or moving down as much as you did, or anything along those lines? Or you could even take this as a guy that surprised you with where he's ranked today versus where he was ranked in your last set of rankings midseason last year.
I think Nostrini is probably the guy just because like I said, I had heard shortly after the draft that, this is someone to look out for. The stuff is a lot better than back to the 4th round. but I think even over the offseason, talking to a couple people and hearing that, uh, how good it was. And he's a guy who I moved up a couple times, while I was adjusting. So he wasn't originally at 8. He was a few spots lower, but I ended up moving him up based on what I heard.
Great. Is there a guy that you wanted to put higher on the list than you actually did, or maybe the opposite, a guy that sort of you wanted to push lower but just somehow crept his way back up the list?
I would go with Clayton Beater as a guy who I wanted to put higher. I loved him coming out of the draft, was very excited when the Dodgers were able to nab him at the end of the second round. They didn't really stretch him out a whole lot last year. His longest outing was 3 1/3 innings. So, and then there are some reports that the Dodgers look at him as a reliever, and I wouldn't blame them because they do have a lot of starters at that upper level, and his fastball, power, curveball mix, is just primed for a high leverage relief spot. So it wouldn't be surprising to see him shifted to relief. I think they'll let him start for as long as he can, but some indications that he might be as a reliever. So I moved him below a couple guys who I think have a better shot of starting long term.
Got it. Okay. And looking at the list, I mean, it's fun to see. I love how you put pre-2021 rankings because, again, Eddie's Leonard, a guy that was 79th, now he's 7th. Jose Ramos was 66th. Yorby Vivas was 45th. Gavin Stone was 63rd. I mean, is there a guy, let's say in the 60-plus range, that you're like, hey, if there's 2 names to watch out for, guys that could easily find themselves inside the top 10 to 15 on this list a year from now, are there any names that immediately come to mind?
Looking outside the top 60.
I know, I'm putting you on the spot here.
You are. One guy I'll point out is Ronan Copp, who was a somewhat notable draft prospect in the 2020 draft. It wasn't taken. Went to a junior college. He pitched in the MLB Draft League last summer against really a lot older competition, and the stuff was really good. Good fastball. He's huge. I think he's 6'7". So he's a 6'7", 19-year-old who can throw in the mid-90s with good fastball traits. He has a couple of secondary pitches that I like. So someone who has some pretty high upside, and I think if he goes out and goes to low A and pitches well, I think could be grouped a lot closer to the Bruns and Hubeck and Rosario and Henrique as those younger arms who should also be at low A.
Okay. A couple other names just that I'm looking through. I mean, Jesus Scalise was a guy that was a huge international signing, another catcher in the Dodgers system. I was looking at Jake Vogel, a guy that was sort of 2 years ago, a draft pick, high school guy, some high upside. I mean, either of those guys, I know you got Vogel trending down, Jesus Scalise trending even. They're 35th and 37th on the list. Any notes on those two?
Yeah, so I think this is where the Dodgers' depth comes into play, because I think depending on who you talk to, those are going to be, top 30, top 25 guys. But in other systems, especially, I think, they would be in the top 30 or so of a lot of systems.
Got it.
And Vogel, he has 70 or 80 level speed, good defense in center field. He was always going to be a developmental bat, and I definitely would not write him off, just based on a little bit of a down first year. High school bat who's still very much a work in progress. And Scalise, again, even younger than Vogel, and the Dodgers' history with developing catchers and developing bats. Nothing really to worry about a whole lot with those two.
Yeah, Scalise,
at least
I should have pointed out, is 18 years old. Jake Vogel is 20 years old. So these are guys that if you compare him to a Nastrini, who, was just drafted a year ago, and yet the age of guys coming out, Nastrini's 22. So Vogel is 2 years away from being the same age as a guy that is in his coming off of his rookie year, essentially in the Dodgers system. So worth noting there. Okay, last question is the question that I know most people are thinking about. Major league level. Who are some guys that, Matt and I just filmed a show yesterday, and we're talking about the Dodgers bullpen. And, I mean, they got 18 guys for 13 spots once we get to May 1st, and they got to trim that group down. So on the pitching side, it doesn't feel like there's an opening, maybe for a Mitch White, maybe for a Andre Jackson. But beyond that, I'm not so sure. On the offensive side, they're going to open carrying just 3 bench bats plus a designated hitter. Now, that number is going to go up. but maybe it's a Jake Lamb who takes the first extra spot once it comes available. Is this a year where the Dodgers are going to need to lean on some of the guys on your list, or do you think this is a year where maybe spot duty here and there, but by and large, this is going to be a Dodgers season dictated by the guys already on the 40-man?
You know, I think you would hope not to have to lean on guys who aren't on the 40-man yet. In an ideal world, the starters all stay healthy. Tony Gonsolin is back to, the 2020 version of Tony Gonsolin. Andrew Heaney, the reclamation project goes well. Tyler Anderson gives them good innings. The bullpen, stays good. No one gets hurt on offense. That's the ideal world. I don't think that's the world that we expect to live in. So, and I think the big difference from last year is we had Gray and we had Ruiz and we had a bunch of other guys who, were probably not ready for a, significant major league role. Luke Raley, DJ Peters, to name just a couple. A lot of those guys aren't in the organization anymore, but I think those guys, were forced into roles they may not have been perfectly ready for, especially coming off the, no 2020 minor league season, which, I wouldn't discount the impact that had on especially a lot of the upper level guys who hadn't had the experience. But back to the main point, I think the difference in last year is that there are a lot of different guys who could contribute, and maybe, they're not contributing right off the bat, but they could contribute in the second half. Someone like Bobby Miller or Clayton Beater or Landon Nash. I don't think those are guys who would start in the major leagues, even if there was a, substantial need for a fifth starter. I think they'd probably start off with someone like Andre Jackson or Mitch White or even Ryan Pepio. But those are all guys who could contribute in the second half of the year. Same thing with Miguel Vargas, with Michael Busch. The positional versatility that those two can offer, a little more expansive than Ruiz was able to offer last year just as a catcher. The DH opens up another position for them to come up and get at bats and not just have to come up and sit on the bench because they need another body there. So I would expect, especially in the second half of the year, if there is a need, they have, some options to call on.
Yeah. And I guess related to that is kind of, the question of how somebody feels about Cody Bellinger. And what sort of expectations are, how somebody feels about Gavin Lux and what expectations are. Edwin Rios, Zach McKinstry, guys like that. I mean, when you look at those four, I know I keep telling you I'm going to get you out of here on this. This will be the last question, I promise. But, I mean, with those guys, like, where are you at on Cody Bellinger and Gavin Lux? Because I think the answer to that question says a lot about, does Miguel Vargas get a shot? Like, can Edwin Rios produce at the 2019-2020 levels, or is it the 2021 pre-shoulder surgery levels? Like, those are the types of questions that I think will dictate Michael Busch and Miguel Vargas and Andy Pages, et cetera, et cetera. So where are you at on Bellinger, Lux, Rios, McKinstry, et cetera?
So I know, man, this doesn't seem like a super popular view. It's April 4th. Yeah. I'm not really all that concerned about Bellinger, who is very much a swing tinkerer, which can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. But it also means that, like, he's not wallowing in his own misery because he hasn't figured out in April. He's made that very clear, and I think that's the right attitude for a player like him to have. He came off of shoulder surgery last year, missed a bunch of time because of the leg injury, and just never get right. It didn't look like he had the strength that he once had, the power that he once had, and I was impressed by him just being able to adjust on the fly in late September and October and find a way to just, put the ball in play and hit it somewhat hard, which he was able to do. I don't think there are a lot of guys who can do that, and I think it's indicative of his talent level. And so while he's trying to get back to, the best version of himself, there might be some rough stretches, and I think that he and the Dodgers are willing to let him go through that in order to let him get back to the Cody Bellinger that everyone wants to see. And that's not based on any data or anything. That's just my opinion. So I'm not basing that on conversations I've had or anything like that either. As with Lux, he's still pretty young.
22, I think, or 24.
He's 24. So, he's not like, some 27-year-old, post-type prospect. He is kind of a post-type prospect, though. So I wouldn't be down on him either. I think if he gets consistent at bats and he looks like he's, in a good groove so far this spring, the same thing's true with Edwin Rios, although the bigger question with him is going to be shoulder health. But I think so far with those two, I'm encouraged by what I've seen in the spring, but I'm not willing to put a whole lot of stock in it. My attitude about spring training is always, you can look at positives. You can look at a guy who looks like he's swinging the bat well, who looks like he's figured something out, a pitcher who shows up with an improved slider, a more fastball velocity. I'm not super interested in looking into this guy's velocity is down.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because they had to ramp up super quickly. So I think if things like those, if issues that start extending into May and June, and it's June 20th and Cody Bellinger is hitting 180, I will absolutely be concerned.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I'm going to be honest.
But
I'm going to be concerned way before June 20th if he's hitting 180.
This team is built to withstand 100%. The regular season in order to, now it's to get a top 2 seed and get a bye in the first round of the playoffs and to win in October. And I think, if Cody Bellinger has to take some lumps in the first couple months of the year in order to be the player they need him to be in October, that's fine. And they should have the depth to withstand that offensively and defensively.
Yeah. Worst case scenario, he's a 180 hitter in the 9-hole who's playing great defense for you in center field, and the 8 guys in front of him are basically all-star caliber players, so you'll be all right. So anyways, well, that's Justin Lorber. You can check his stuff out at Future Dodgers on Twitter. Like I said, futuredodgers.com. He just posted his new rankings. There's tons of great content, blurbs on just about every player on that list, his top 100 rankings. So it's great stuff in there. So check out Justin's stuff. As always, we appreciate him joining us. Please check out DodgerBlue.com, DodgerBlue1958 on social media. If you're new over the last couple of weeks, we now have a podcast. DodgerHeads is on Apple. We are on Spotify. We're working on Google. So if you check out podcasts there, please subscribe, rate, review. We'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, on YouTube, if you're here, subscribe and ring the notification bell and tell your friends. That's Justin. My name is Jeff. We appreciate you joining us. Opening day, just a couple days away. We'll see you soon.